Manu Varma, thank you so much for joining us of Better.me and Traction on Demand fame. You've been in the business for a very long time. How would you describe what you do in your job on an average work week to a 5 or 95-year-old?
Wow, interesting. From the more traditional HR side, for most of my career has been, I feel like I'm trying to blend people, process, and technology in a way that makes people excited to come to work. And I think that kind of transcends into kind of this product offering too that we did. And my mom's 90, and she's always curious about, you're working in cloud-based technology. She says, well, it rains so often in Vancouver. What do you do when it rains? So I've learned to take out that whole cloud-based component when I'm talking to a 95-year-old, and I guess the same would probably not be the same for a 5-year-old, I guess.
It's funny because I read the other day that a T-shirt and it was like, there is no cloud, it's just someone else's computer. And I thought that was pretty funny.
That's pretty good, actually.
So how do you define culture at the highest level? And then would that definition change when you were talking about an organization?
Yeah, interesting. So for me, I think what culture is for me is a set of those unwritten rules that kind of that gather a group of people together. And I think when we really see culture is when shit gets bad, right? Because I think it's not a calm sea that makes a great sailor. It's really how you perform in the rough times or where things get shitty and muddy. So actually, I don't see that different being as it translates to a company. Even more so, I think it's even more salient because I think it's really easy for a company to have a great polished video of here's like our retreats and we've got beer pong because that's what culture is, right? Versus when actually things do hit the fan, how do people come out? Is that kind of how do people respond best in fight or flight?
Definitely. If you could create the ideal organizational culture with no restrictions such as cost or time, what are the first 3 things that come to mind for you?
It would have to be entrepreneurial. For me, I think there's so many benefits to that. First is just when people treat something like it's their own, the output is better. From a management perspective, that's always bottom line is people treat the company's money like it's their own, that it also has a great outcome. Second, it has to be altruistic. I think there needs to be some element of for good, to take a line from the B Corp movement, right? Business is a force for good or a force for change. And I think that is it has to be whatever. I think companies need to go beyond just donating to the food bank. I think that's, doing that food shift, which is great and it's important. But I think there needs to be an integrated piece beyond corporate social responsibility, but that integrated or corporate social integration that's woven into your business model. I think that's key. And then I think the third element is inclusion. And now my definition of inclusion is not what's out there today. It goes far beyond like this mandated, what I would call compliance, diversity, demographic diversity tabulation. For me, it is truly about what does it feel to be a part of an organization and be included, whether it's my age, whether it's my thought processes, whether I'm negative or positive. That's when I feel it's like, how am I amplifying the voice of the employee such that everybody feels they're getting a good kick at the can? So those are probably my top 3.
Awesome. Thanks, Manu. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. When you think of poor organizational culture, what are the first few things that come to mind? First 3 things, 2 or 3 things.
For me, hierarchy is just the root to all evil. Because again, the antithesis and the opposite of inclusion, right? Is just that kind of patriarchal, I will do what my boss says and never shall the past diverge. So that to me is always a problem. I think second, this pure desire to profitability. Now, obviously, I know every business needs to be profitable, but I think when you make decisions based on margin and profit, which I've been a part of through my career, I think that's also problematic. And so that drives a really poor culture. And I think third, bureaucracy, right? I think that is When we're justifying processes just because they've always been there, and you need to like, do I need to, as a VP, do you need to be approving 500 expense accounts? Like, does it make sense to what business, and how does that reflect? You talk about having an entrepreneurial culture, and then all you're doing is improving. Like, it just doesn't make a ton of sense for me. So I guess those are probably my three. They're almost exact opposites of my pro. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that's to be expected. No, great answers. Thank you. It's interesting because when I ask these, rarely is something that's cost relevant. People don't talk about things. When I say no restrictions for cost or time, it doesn't seem to impact because most of the things that matter to culture aren't necessarily cost related, which is really interesting. So early in your career, you worked at a more established tech company. How do people and culture HR needs of an older organization differ from a younger, less established company? I'm kind of thinking about that transition, when you joined Traction.
Super interesting. So I think, and having seen it evolve even at Traction, right? I mean, one of my big things is I never wanted to be a policy police, right? That's not engaging work for me or anyone in HR, anyone that I talk to in HR. So I think finding that line of getting shit done, right? Versus having kind of repeatable or guidance kind of in the future. What is that balance, right? And I think with the smaller companies, that's exactly the last thing you want. And I would actually advocate for the larger companies too, even though you're going for the IPO readiness in a lot of cases. I think that's a bit of a kiss of doom for culture, strong culture. I've seen it with so many companies, right? I think back in Canada's history, I look at Nortel, right? This beautiful bright star, and they just started slamming and it really fell to pieces. And so for me, that's what I've always tend to see, and was kind of hoping to break that trend a little bit. And I think we did it to a certain extent, because I mean, having that limitless horizon of what we can change, I think is super important. And sometimes a policy, just because it made sense, doesn't mean it makes sense. And we typically don't revise policies like once they're ingrained. Typically, you don't see these established companies wanting to evolve or take it away. So for me, I've always preferred this absence of policy. I'm hiring you. We're both normal adults. We kind of get it. We put the time in up front. So I really never see, and we're all guarded by provincial and federal legislation already. so why duplicate the effort? That's just my perspective.
Very interesting, very interesting. So I'm gonna bring a question forward because you mentioned it. In another interview, you've mentioned this idea that HR departments should get rid of policies. That made me wonder that in a large and rapidly growing organization, what can stand in for policies as unwritten cultural norms can take time or be hard to download to new hires. And I've been there. The unwritten cultural norms are there, but if they're not policies or they're not documented or they're not part of a handbook, how are we going to pass those things on if there are no policies?
I think there's some interesting ways that we can kind of gamify this and make this more, if these are the unwritten rules, how can we leverage storytelling more effectively, right? And use it, whether it be through video, through technology, through onboarding and re-onboarding, or just kind of leveraging different communication channels through different vehicles. I think leveraging middle management is also very key in this. I think it's definitely, there's this kind of, well, why aren't people getting this? We know what the vision is. We know what the values are. Why aren't they getting it? So I don't think that most companies do a great job at equipping their middle managers as a tool. You can put as many policies as you want, but then how does that enable and empower the middle management team? And I think there's other ways that we can amplify that employee voice such that they get a say, and it's okay to fail. Like if you break a rule, okay, well, as long as no one's gotten hurt from it, let's not make this like the line in the sand. So we can learn from that, and there we get that storytelling piece, which we can then embolden into maybe a handbook or a video. But that also should change. Like, how often do companies update their handbooks? Like they're so up, well, 1984. So and that, does that become an artifact? Or does that actually become the voice of the company? Does that become the culture, but then is practice different? Because that's what's so often you got a policy, but then practice. So then for me, it's just it's hard. But I get that, there's regulatory bodies in certain industries, and we have to do that. There's some fiduciary responsibility and regulatory stuff that we need to do. So I guess for me, to answer your question in the wrong way, maybe guideposts are a better way, right?
Nice.
Here's kind of here's where you can operate. Here are the guardrails, as opposed to here's your policy, which I think makes a lot of sense for inclusion, for growth, for expansion and contraction, for bringing in new people from different countries, from different cultures, different age groups. So it kind of gives us a bit more wiggle room.
You had me thinking of a scavenger hunt, cultural scavenger hunt that you'd send new employees on. Hey, go around, meet all the people that aren't in your direct department, ask them these questions, and they're going to tell you what the values are or what those norms are. I thought that, you just had me thinking of that. You also had me thinking of a recent Harvard Business Review article where they talked about the two most underutilized groups in terms of human resources and people and culture being middle managers and the board, and how important engaging those folks are and having them on board.
Yeah, totally full fan of it. I didn't even think about the board, but that's a great example.
Awesome. So you've been with Traction on Demand since January 2014. The organization has grown in leaps and bounds since then. Tell us how your work has evolved. So I think there were about 300 people, or you were growing to 300 when you started, and now there's many more.
Yeah, when I joined, we were about 18 people. So we could get the whole company to a small meeting room. And I remember going in there for actually my demo interview had like the whole company in it, which was a little bit harrowing. Like, I don't know this platform at all. And all they got these smart tech folks around me. And now we're over 1,000 people.
How has your role evolved since then? Yeah, thinking about 18 and 1,000, that's got to be huge difference.
It's been a crazy ride, but probably the funnest ride in my life. I think one of the things I enjoy about being in a startup or a smaller company is just that broad portfolio, and being able to cut your teeth and try things and fail. Like I think when we're kind of opening up our American entity and trying to save money and not just hiring an outside agent, because typically entrepreneurs, you don't pay someone else to do something that you could do. It might take you 10x, but you'll still get there. So it's like one step forward, two steps back. So that was really rewarding to me. So I think even for most of the time, it was very much doesn't matter what your title is, like you're rolling up your sleeves, you're doing whatever, whether I'm building desks or recruiting day in and out. And it was the same for the CEO. And so that was super cool. I definitely, and I think that's where you get your storytelling and your culture from too, right? To evolving now, what I found was missing for me in my role in the HR world after 20, 25 years, I always felt this need to talk to customers. So off the side of my desk, I always had this, so frustrated with all the HR tools out there, they suck, right? And I really wanted to bring a difference. So we kind of built our own sort of platform internally on a platform that wasn't meant to use for HR. And for me, why should HR be a separate system? Like intake is intake, right? Whether it's a new sales lead or whether it's a new recruiting lead or a marketing lead, intake is intake. So why are we not using a similar business system? And that was kind of the genesis of what we put forth. So in my career, I just kind of pivoted to doing a bit more customer work. And then Traction as a whole has this big, hairy, audacious goal of spinning out 100 CEOs in 10 years. And really, the meaning behind that is attributed fully to Greg Malpass, the CEO. And he wants to flood the business market with like-minded individuals that follow that B Corp mandate, that give back, that believe in this work-life integration, that believe in having multiple careers but within the same company as opposed to having to leaving. So wanting to incubate these other product businesses. So as of last year, spurred on by COVID, we had this internal tool that was cataloging, engaging our employee sentiment based on kind of what they were doing. So we were able to get this line of sight to what made people tick. What industry, if they're a consultant, what industry they'd like to work in, what element of the platform they'd like to work in, what size of projects they prefer to work on. So that's what I've been doing over the past year, is kind of heading up the community of this kind of product company that we've used internally at Traction for about 4 years, and kind of thought, well, I think Picasso said it best, right? The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose is to give it away. So we always thought that our gift is technology, and here we had this opportunity with this tool that we built called Better, that we could potentially help bridge the social distance, help bridge some burnout out there, whatever was kind of pivoting and going to remote working. We thought we could take this out to the market. And so that's what I've been doing for the past year. I mean, who spins out a product company when you don't know anything about it? When your whole background has been in HR during a pandemic? Yes. So
Awesome.
I think what's actually been really good for that is, helping people pivot. Sometimes, kind of encouraging them to do so, but then also giving people, if there's a muscle they enjoy flexing, let them flex it. If there's a muscle they want to develop, also give them that opportunity to do so. So it's been a crazy evolution, kind of from the traditional HR side to, I don't even know what to call it now.
Human products for humans.
That solution, I don't even know it. But ultimately, for me, titles never really mattered to me. I've met a ton of CEOs that don't know what the hell they're doing, right? And I'm like, and we all know there's internal titles, external titles. So for me, it's never really been a big deal. What's more important to me is what's the impact I'm making to my internal community and the broader community as a whole.
Awesome. So in previous interviews, you speak a lot about the lack of the use and implementation of software and technology in human resources and people and culture. What do you think are the two biggest barriers for tech in HR, and how would you recommend others to overcome those? Maybe they're human resources leaders who see technology, know it's important, want to roll it out to their team. Maybe they have 10, 20, 30 people in their human resources department. Maybe some of those people are not going to get on the bus, so to speak. What are the two biggest barriers for them, and how do you think they can overcome them?
Yeah, having sold into it, I totally get that. I get there. I think first off, the HR budget, right, is always so finite, and this is always looked at as a net spend, and how many companies really want to invest in that. And I think the problem is that most traditional HR departments don't provide a ton of value, right? They haven't taken those steps to become a trusted advisor to the business. And for me, the clearest case is they don't understand what the business does. Typical HR, like I would love to see, and I've done it myself, go in, do the job of somebody that you've been recruiting for. How else do you understand? Like, if you're an HR professional, for me in a consulting agency, I went in and did like a scoping session with a customer. I went in and did the function of the business analyst. I've done some building on the platform. I've never done some software development because I'm not that smart. But I think that just helped me be more effective in my job, right? So I think that's the biggest key. I think the biggest barrier is that businesses aren't seeing the value that HR is bringing, so that translates to the budget they get. So I think the biggest solution is like get out there and understand your business, get out of your office, get out of your pod, right? And I never had a set seat for my first 5 years. I would sit in different parts of the organization, in different pods, to get to know people, to hear what they're talking about, so they can hear what I'm talking about. And it made this just a huge difference for that. I learned a lot. Hopefully you learned something from me too. And I think that was really, really powerful.
Awesome.
And I think there's an element of fear to the second point. Like we've always done it this way. And if you view yourself as a policy police, what is technology going to help you do? Not too much, right? For me, it's about enablement, empowerment. And instead of holding things close, let's expose. I think that's the power of technology, is to be able to reach a bigger audience. Where I feel a lot of HR folks are more about protecting the business, which is obviously part of your role, but you're also there to enable and protect the individual. So finding that right balance, I think, is tough for a lot of more traditionals, as we call them.
Yeah, awesome. That actually reminded me of some of my most successful sales work. Become the trusted advisor, be the expert consultant, assume the role in the company that's missing to make your sale successful. And I think about that from an HR perspective, and you kind of just blew my mind a little bit. Just to, instead of feeling like you're the payroll benefits administrator, think about your role more as the strategic external consultant and put on that hat and kind of apply yourself in that way. Really a fascinating approach that can yield more budget and hopefully, more capability to improve the business.
It's so true, and especially if you're coming into a company and you bring all this, and it's not just for HR, but you go in and you brought your experience, and some of the bad, some of the good, but typically you don't go in there and just like, I'm going to try to learn the business, but I try to bring in what made my job easier without any kind of customer journey map for those internal customers or external customers and how it impacts them. So it shouldn't be what makes my job easier as an HR professional. It should be what's making my customers' lives better and what's the output and impact I'm having on them. And I don't think that there's that mind shift in a lot of HR today.
There's sales in every job, right? There's sales in every interaction. When I'm trying to advocate to my family, we're going to go on vacation. When you're in the HR team trying to battle for budget, it's tough when folks can shy away and view that necessary skill of not selling someone to buy something from you, but selling them on your idea and getting them on board. I think that can really help for leaders in the people and culture space for sure. Shifting more to some more of my traditional questions, tell us about a time when you were able to create and build culture successfully. What was the hardest part of that successful journey and mission to build culture?
One of the things that was really important to me in my career, I've seen it really frustrated by this, where the only place to advance people's career was to become a people manager, right? To make more money, to get more influence. And that was typically the only way. So when it came to Traction, that was something that was really important for me, is that we had multiple tracks for people's career. So if I just wanted to be still an influencer, but I hated managing people, there was still a path forward for me, right, where I could still elevate my career, make more money, be more influential, but not have to manage people because I suck at it, right? And so that was a big thing for me. And I think getting that off the ground, and now we have 36 or something different career paths, one being a people path and the other kind of being expert or technical career paths, which is so great. Because I think what that netted in terms of, from my perspective in the culture, is that, hey, we value as an individual. There's multiple ways for you. And by the way, this is what inclusion is about for me, right? Figuring out multiple ways of how we can still develop you, give back to you, let you do what you want to do, and maybe explore some other things too along the way, and not just have this one way for you to succeed is to become team lead, supervisor, manager, director, VP, and then right, and have some fun with it too along the way of making it a little bit more interesting, having the same type of banded guidelines, so we're treating people fairly. But I think that really had this effect of democratizing everything, keeping it fair. That to me is really where culture comes from. Is like, what are you doing in your processes that really reinforce what you say your culture is and what it isn't. So for me, that was probably a really big thing. But then again, Traction Pulse are better. That was also a big deal, right? Just and I know Greg used this really effectively. He would every week would look at the people with the highest scores, like the highest sentiment and the lowest sentiment, and reach out to them. I mean, that emotional goodwill that built with the CEO was like, oh my God, like he's reaching out to me. That made a big difference, but also how it helped us grow is that we were able to, as we grew and got into more different verticals and industries, it enabled us to give people work that was more meaningful to them. You know, we have a big, strong nonprofit practice. Mm-hmm. So it helps us identify people whose ethos really identified with that and give them that type of work, or people that really enjoyed working in retail. We could channel and build teams around people that really enjoyed that type of work, and then looked at secondary work preferences, which was super cool. So for me, that you talk about having an individual people first culture, those to me were probably two of the biggest elements that we as a company were able to do.
I think that one you discussed around the path as an independent producer versus a manager, I remember when that rolled out at Hootsuite, that really shifted the mentality of it. Wow, I don't have to manage people, and I can still rise up in the organization. I think, that path may have existed prior to the announcement and the sort of definition of it, but man, it sure made a lot of people excited about a potential path for them that didn't require them to spend half their week in one-on-one meetings, right?
Right. And for people going, oh my God, this person has no EQ and empathy, and I don't want to report to this person, right?
Definitely.
Direct impact on attrition.
So what are the most impactful things that you do to translate organizational vision for your team?
I think transparency is key for me. I probably tend to over-communicate with the meetings that I'm in. I try to be as transparent as possible because I think I never want anything to be a surprise to people that I'm working with. And I probably give them too much of an update, but I also want them to feel included for that, because I always appreciate that. Am I polychronic in my cultural approach? I like more information than less information. So I think that's really important. I also like to take the same approach that I would do, say, if I was teaching or a class or facilitating a workshop, right? Is try to give them something to read, something to listen to, and then something to see, right?
Nice.
Just with that kind of visual, kinesthetic, and auditory, just so I can appeal to everyone's different learning styles, however they may want to be consuming that, such that I've gotten all my bases covered. So I haven't been always successful, but that's always been my philosophy to do so. More information is this, and then also, trying to bring people into meetings where they wouldn't otherwise normally be, right? And kind of giving them some deliverables and takeaways. I've always found that really effective, and I've always, even when I was younger, I was like that as like a little mini promotion or a reward, right? And so I've always tried to mirror that because that happened to me in my first real job with a tie. That wasn't a restaurant. And that always resonated for me. So I've tried to duplicate what happened to me to people that I work with.
Awesome. Sometimes organizational culture is not a good fit between employees and companies. What advice would you give others to help them figure that out for themselves? And when I ask this question, people come at it from both angles. You might be coming at it from, here's advice to a potential hire, here's advice to somebody who's doing the recruiting and the hiring.
Interesting. For me, I think both from the recruitment side and the candidate side, you need to be clear on what your non-negotiables are. What's that line in the sand that you would overlook a few red flags for, versus I'm out of here. So yes, we have probationary periods and that's what it's for, but that's kind of it's a lot of time and investment and energy to enter into on both sides to kind of depart ways in 90 days or less. So for me, it's really being solid on what those non-negotiables are for you, and then testing. If you have an inkling that something doesn't feel right, ask a question, especially in an interview, which is tough for a candidate. You're getting a bit of a red flag, or read some reviews on Glassdoor, or the responses seem too canned. Everything seems too perfect. This isn't really sitting right with me. Can you help me? Right? So put your fears at rest. If trust your instincts, I guess, is the next thing. Is if it feels, ask some questions and test that against your non-negotiables. Because everyone says, well, Traction's got a great culture. I'm like, yeah, it's great for me, but it may not be great for everybody else, right? And it's not. This is not a place for somebody who wants to punch in a card and kind of do their job 9 to 4 or whatever, come in and come out. This is a place if you want to explore and be entrepreneurial and flex some different muscles and really be yourself authentically. If you're looking for a regulated environment, this is not it. And if you have a hard time with gray, you will not probably have a great time. Doesn't mean we won't hire you, but that's a question where I would look at, and I have in Canada. I think recruiters need to also be very honest.
Yeah.
But not every candidate wants to get that feedback. So, right. So I think it's a question of like, hey, if you want some feedback, I'll give it to you. Right. Or at the risk of overstepping my bounds, like I'm getting this sense. And again, test your theory. If this is true, ask the questions of the candidate, let them respond, and you can further judge that. I hate making hasty decisions. Yes, you hear one thing once, okay, but test it a couple times, especially in an interview, because it may not be true.
Yeah, I think human resource professionals suffer a little bit because of the sort of nature of regulations around what you can ask people and what you can tell people. So when it comes to someone, a lot of people I know, they do want feedback, and I think for a hiring manager, it might just be too like, who knows what could happen by giving honest feedback to this person. Maybe they're going to go give a terrible review on Glassdoor and hurt our employer brand. And I understand there's risk, but I also know that employees who prospective employees who have settled egos and are secure in themselves, they really relish that type of feedback. So it's a tough thing to manage for people, I think.
And the Glassdoor is an opportunity. Does it suck to read all that? Absolutely. But it also gives you another opportunity to actually respond, and most times than not, you're able to highlight, not necessarily to be defensible, but at least highlights another side of the story so readers can make their own decision.
Definitely. So a lot of hiring managers across our lovely country are dealing with an increasingly challenging environment to get talent.
Mm.
What would you recommend to smaller companies who are competing with bigger companies when they can't compete purely on compensation? How should they be competing for top talent?
Mm. Great. You know, for example, great example as attraction. We don't pay, we pay competitively, but we're not known for paying 110% to market. I think there's a lot of ways that you can approach that. I think finding that talent. I think going to more of an aptitude-based hiring model as opposed to skills-based would be a huge benefit. Right? There's tons of people, especially kind of given what's happened in the past 12 months, with people with a ton of transferable skills, like from retail, hospitality, the airlines industry, that could really quite easily transfer into another role. And so to be able to look for the people with the attitude that want to switch and the aptitude to be able to do so, I think that's really key. In terms of kind of compensating for the lack of or not having top dollar compensation, I think it's those other things like what's your element of for good? Like what are you doing in your company? What does the future look like, right? So painting that picture of the art of the possible in terms of what would career growth look like. So maybe I'm not able to pay that top dollar today, but maybe 2 to 4 years I can be able to do that. And kind of the longer you're with the business, as the business grows, here's the growth trajectory, which obviously means bigger impact of salary. Here's kind of where we're looking to get some funding. I think that also helps, but I also think kind of giving them those what I would call non-mons, right? Just here you go, work from home, have a flexible work schedule, bring your dog into work, stay at home, right? Make up your day. Ultimately, things are getting done. What does it cost you? Nothing. So why not really leverage that? Don't nickel and dime them with their time off. I think there's a lot that can be done with that doesn't really impact their output. But sometimes there's just that reluctance of like that time clock mentality or button chair mentality, or what do they call it? Presenteeism?
Presenteeism, that's the one.
Yeah, bane of my existence. Like I've even heard of some companies during COVID, right? You need to take a picture of where you're working from today and send it to your manager. Why? Like talk about souring a relationship with your employer right off the bat. You trust me enough to hire me, but you don't trust me enough to do. So I think that's a big battle, and especially with a lot of kids, younger folks coming out, they're commanding some pretty big salaries with some of these tech skills. There's such a shortage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's we're competing against each other, and especially here in Vancouver, right? We're we're poaching from each other, and we're doing damage to this ecosystem. It's not sustainable. And having lived through the dot bomb, right? I'm always so cognizant of that. So I think the answer to that is to be looking at these kind of other non-traditional sources of talent. And we have a ripe group of it right now from COVID, but it does take that extra bit of skill. And I find for the most part, most HR organizations put their most junior people in recruiting roles. And I think they solely just gloss over the skill. They don't have the right skills, they're out. Or they filtered out their filters if they don't see this, as opposed to looking for people that are in transition, that have kind of the solid business acumen that is very impossible to teach. And so that I think I'll kind of answer that question in two fronts, but I think that's what I would
Awesome. Say. Thank you so much, Manu. Great response. Let's get to some current events. Recently, two companies, Coinbase and Basecamp, made public announcements regarding their desire and initiative to not weigh in on political and sensitive topics. This is being seen from two extremes, either as a smart move or a cowardly move. Basecamp ended up losing a third of their employees when they offered them an out. How do you think organizations can navigate the increasingly challenging world where taking a side on an issue may alienate the opposing group? How do you see these moves by these organizations?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, what's happened as of recent, it's always been happening. This is nothing new. There's been major impacts every decade since I've been alive, going back to MLK in the 60s. Not that I was born in the 60s. But so it's interesting to me, and I've always kind of had an expectation that companies should do more. And I think over the past 10, 15 years, we've seen government falter in so many different countries. And I think we've seen religion play a lesser role. All these kind of traditional entities that people would look to for guidance, for ethics, So I think it is incumbent upon businesses to do so, and I think in not doing so is definitely, yeah. I mean, there courage, lack of courage for sure. Like I think Patagonia is a great example, right? Like what a historic. I mean, that woman she's phenomenal, and they got that tax break from the federal government, and they put all that money and get like just doing so much good. Are they probably missing out on some? Sure, but I think ultimately, at the end of the day, what do we have is our ethics and morality and time. Ultimately, taxes are separate, right? But I think absolutely, I think businesses have to take a step, but it has to also be authentic, right? Because I think those people can really figure out. Well, okay, you've got a BLM sticker on your website. Okay, well, what does that mean? It truly feels authentic. Even just how we acknowledge we're on the unceded lands here in British Columbia or throughout Canada, right? Well, what does that mean? And it just feels like it's become a little bit of like and we read through it. So I look for businesses to not just make a statement, but to integrate this into what they do. And I think that's where change comes from. And it's not just simply paying lip service to, using pronouns, for example. How is that actually fostering more inclusion in the workplace? That's what I'm curious to see as an employee, but also it's also stuff as a leader in an organization. That's the stuff I'm excited to be able to talk through and admit, have we screwed up? Have we not done enough? Do we have more to do? Because it's not something that's a one and done. It's definitely a process. But I do expect every company to have an opinion, just like I expect all my friends in my group to have an opinion. If they don't have an opinion, educate them or cut them out.
Yeah, Patagonia is definitely missing out on some revenue from some branded vests, but they took the high road, I guess, on that one. Okay, we're winding down here. We're going to ask you to get into your time machine a little bit and tell us a story about being a more junior team member where you had an experience with good culture. What was it like? How did it make you feel? What did you learn from it?
Yeah, I'll probably go back to my first big boy job with a tie in an office. I had a boss and a mentor who was just phenomenal in a very large company. But she kind of took personal interest in me. So there's that level of authenticity that she was not afraid to put her own professional reputation at risk for my development, which went a long way when I was like, I don't know, 25 or something. And she was definitely a well-respected professional in the HR space. And she kind of took some risks. I remember when she went away for the summer for 4 months and put me into a leadership role, and everyone was like a good 20, 25 years older than me. So that was, from a cultural standpoint, what it told me, they're willing to take risks. They believe in me based on who I am, not because of my seniority. So that was really telling, and I'm still friends with her like 25 years later, which is pretty amazing. Was that necessarily indicative of the whole company as a whole? I don't know, but definitely within that subsect of that company, that was definitely authenticity, treating each individual as an individual with their strengths. That was super cool, and it really, it made me feel welcome and included, despite me.
Awesome. This question almost always results in a story about an individual that helped mentor somebody, which is really interesting around what good culture is, especially when you're junior. For a junior person, it seems like good culture is having someone care about you and care about your development and growth, and how important that is for you as a human. As a junior person, you believe in yourself all of a sudden because somebody who's further along is saying, yeah, I believe in you too.
Interesting. That's a cool pattern. I like that.
Tell us a story about being a junior team member where you had an experience with bad culture. What was it like? How did it make you feel? What did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, this was probably a company of about 1,000 people. What I learned there, and what I heard a lot about things of, we can't hire any women because they're going to get pregnant, go on mat leave, too difficult. Yet everybody on the C-suite was married with children. did a ton of mergers and acquisitions, and I was kind of doing kind of the people side on the M&A. And the people that we were doing site shutdowns was not a concern. It was more like this, have they got their letters, right? As opposed to what's the change management, what's the communication strategy going to be, what support are we offering them? And so that was a very, it was frustrating because I did like my job because it enabled me to travel around the world, which was amazing. I didn't like so much about my job because I was in an M&A factory, so I started making what was that movie, Up in the Air, where it was George Clooney kind of going to do shutdowns all the time?
Yeah, I don't know the name, but I remember the film.
Yeah, so my friends started calling me the Grim Reaper because every go down is doing and didn't do terminations, which was soul crushing for a while, right? Just to pay out higher bonuses to our stock holders. So that was a tough one for me because I've always kind of thought myself, I wanted to mold myself into this kind of people first person that was progressive with my people practices, and that was very tough to work with. And I reported into the CFO, which I also thought was really weird. Why are people reporting into finance? Right. So repeatedly, there were so many red flags, right, that hit my non-negotiables so hard, and that was tough. It resulted obviously in my departure, but there was a lot of years of anguish and struggle.
So yeah, that's, I think I always find I learn the most from my failures as opposed from my successes. Successes have this sort of confirmation bias thing, whereas when you have a failure, there's a clear lesson about why it didn't work, at least one lesson, maybe more.
But I was also never taught work was supposed to be fun. Right? You go to work, you earn a salary, right? You do well, you climb up the ladder. It was a different time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I am imagining my father, and he never gave me any idea that work would be fun from the way he thought about it and viewed it. You did make me think of a final question that I think is a really valuable one, and I'm going to add to my list here. And that's, what would you say to people professionals about dealing with the most challenging part of their job, which is termination, whether that's on an individual basis or, as you described, in an M&A situation where you might be liquidating 30 people at once? How do they insulate themselves from the potential, PTSD or the effects that they're going to have themselves? Not necessarily how they deal with it for others. I'm just curious, what are the things that you've done and that you can do and that you've heard others do to help with that? It sounds like it could be pretty tough.
It's you know what I've always said, if it becomes easy, then you've lost your humanity and you should never do it. So that's always my first line. So anytime I were doing like a site shutdown, that's typically my opening line, to kind of put people, because it doesn't get easier. If it does get easier, and one of the things I also like to say to people is like, look, this is tough for you. Think about how tough it is. Like, you're impacting a family, a lifestyle, right? And which is really big. And I think oftentimes in my career, I've experienced people that are doing them with me on my team, and they're a mess, right? And I'm like, okay, we need to figure out a way to pull your emotion out of this, because this is, imagine how tough it is, and imagine their reaction if they see you like this, right? Like, so it's a tough one. I mean, I have definitely gone down the road of shielding my managers and people in my HR team from this if they don't have the personality type to do it, because ultimately this is probably the biggest exercise in empathy professionally I've ever had to do. And the coolest thing about it is I can think of numerous occasions where people have kind of given me a hug at the end of it, which I was expecting, right? Like hands through the wall. And I've been part of those too, right? I haven't orchestrated those ones, but I've been a part of those ones, right? And I've seen that. So I think it is something professionally, I think, that everybody should go through. From a professional development standpoint, it is super tough, but for that empathy, if nothing else, right? It's a hard one. How much do I say? How much do I don't say? So I think it's that counseling of just the coaching, I should say, of just like, hey, resist the urge to say more, because you're going to want to say more. You're going to want to try to console them. But trust me, if you're on the other side of that, they're not hearing anything but shit. How am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to pay my kids' tuition? So everything that you're saying is actually no. So don't even bother. So I think for me, it's really about preparing people. that are going to be doing it, having the right amount of empathy, post support. I think people do. Obviously, there's going to be a period of emotional response, but I think when they take a second to see, have I been treated fairly, have I been treated as a human, and thinking about how are you exiting these people? Is it human or is it dehumanizing? I think all these things need to be thought out of where are you doing it? How visible is the room? And I think oftentimes we just, well, let's just see what day of the week are you doing it? What time are you doing it, right? I mean, is there ever perfect time? No. Pre-vacation, post-vacation, right? It's not as easy as it seems, but I think I don't say I enjoy doing them, but I know when I take care of them, I know it's done with the right amount of respect that the situation accords. I mean, if they've done something completely wrong, that's a different story. But those are so far and far between. Those really don't happen at least in my career. I've been very lucky around that. But
Awesome.
Business things come up, and I guess it's just.
That was a good description. I like that. I felt like I was in the kitchen there, like watching the chef like talk about how to make the recipe and how it's never straightforward and it's a bit messy, but you got to be professional. And so Manu, finally, what do you read? How do you professionally develop? Are there podcasts that you're all about? Are there websites, newsletters? What stuff can people consume that you consume to get better their craft as people leaders?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Hard Business Review. I love Forbes. Fast Company, I read a lot of too. And it just, those are probably my constants. I spend a ton on LinkedIn. My morning procedure results in check my LinkedIn feed, reading the BBC, reading Al Jazeera, because I like to have my macroeconomic forces around me too. And then professionally, those are definitely my three go-tos. From an HR specific one, I don't really go to a podcast. I definitely jump here and there. I'm still old school. Like, I still love the Stephen Covey stuff. I still identify with it, and maybe it's just because of my age. I really resonate with it. So many names go through, but yeah, I think there's let's keep it at that.
Great. Yeah, of course. Where can people find you online if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I usually respond to everyone unless it's a creepy request. I'm on Instagram too, Snapchat,
Awesome.
Twitter, but LinkedIn is probably where I'm most active.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Manu. Really appreciate your time. You've given so much to us today. We're so grateful.
Well, thanks, Kemp. It was fun to chat with you. A good way to kind of wrap up my day.
Awesome. Thanks. That's it.
Perfect.
We'll be in touch.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks again. You too.